Hello, everyone. Welcome to VR Download. I'm Ian Hamilton in New York, broadcasting today with David Heaney in London. The date is May 28th, 2024, and we're live on YouTube via OBS from David Heaney's UVR Studios. David, what do we have today?
Hello, everyone. This is not going to be as long of a show as usual. I know when I say that, sometimes we end up going for a very long time, but we do only have a few topics to talk about today. Still some pretty significant topics, but not as many in quantity as usual. So first, we'll just briefly talk about the fact that Boneworks is now essentially playable on Quest standalone via a mod for BoneLab. We'll then talk about the super death of Oculus Go. So Go hasn't been supported for years now. There haven't been new apps or updates, but now Oculus Go owners, the few remaining active users, are noticing that many apps are no longer launchable, and Meta is not interested in fixing it. So Go is essentially completely, absolutely very dead now. Finally, we'll talk about Apple Vision Pro finally getting major VR games. So three major VR games coming to Vision Pro in the last week. That's Demio, Job Simulator, and Vacation Simulator. And we're also touching the fact that alongside launching Job Sim on Vision Pro, they had to obviously add hand tracking. They also then brought that hand tracking support over to Quest. So we'll also talk more generally about how we're now entering this new era of hand tracked VR gaming.
Hello to everyone in our comments. I love seeing where everyone says they're watching or listening to us from. I think some people even watch us live. They listen to us. I'm seeing King Jellofish there out there. There's also Quentin tuning in, and a lot of longtime viewers just popping in to watch our show, listen to us in the background, maybe as they're doing something else. I really appreciate you all tuning in, and yeah, let's get right into this first thing and then move on to the end of the show. Thank you to Kyle for filling in last week. I think that was a fun episode. Looked like everyone really had a fun time there. And let's just breeze right through this because I think it's going to be fun in the last section of this show when we talk about the Apple Vision Pro games. But let's talk about this first one, David, with Boneworks.
Yeah, this is crazy. So, many people who have just a standalone Quest will have played Bone Lab, the sequel to Boneworks. But of course, Boneworks itself was only for PC VR. You needed a gaming computer, and if you didn't have one, that meant you weren't able to play Boneworks. One of the biggest aspects of Bone Lab's release that many people were praising and happy about was the fact that you now could play a Boneworks like game on Quest. But of course, there were many aspects of the original Boneworks campaign that people still wanted to play. And that's what these modders have fixed. So Volk64 and Evrodev have released a mod for Bone Lab on Quest called LabWorks. And it basically brings the full Boneworks campaign and several of the non-campaign levels into Bone Lab. And you can play this on Quest or you can play it on PC VR. So if you only own Bone Lab on PC VR, you can play this. We're not going to talk a huge amount about this, but we did just want to bring this up because it does continue a trend that we've been reporting on for the past year, where in many ways this is a golden age for many aspects of VR. We'll talk later about how it's a golden age for hand tracking emerging, but it's also a golden age for modding, right? We've seen this massive shift to bring traditional non-VR games into VR through modding, and now we're seeing a VR game brought to a standalone headset essentially by modders. And that's just an incredible trend to see. The amount of work they must put into this must have been enormous. And yeah, that means that for free, the owners of Bone Lab can play Boneworks essentially on their Quest without a PC.
Yeah, I appreciate the verbiage there, this recognition that I think we're going to come across as a team, that we are entering a new phase of VR gaming. It does feel like a golden age is emerging here for games in general. You've got the kids of the 90s and 80s re-releasing a lot of amazing content in various ways, reimagining it in various ways in VR, and that runs the entire spectrum from just the simplest little changes with VR added in to complete VR adaptations, and then just everything in between, right? Like, who would imagine that Bone Labs modding system could be used in this way? And that's just the beginning, right? It's going to only get crazier and weirder from here. let's move on to this.
I think there's one
Sorry, go ahead.
comment I want to bring up here from Quentin that makes a very good point that we should also talk about the fact that Questcraft just arrived for Quest 3. So if you're not familiar, Questcraft is a port of the Java version of Minecraft, the PC-only Java version, to Quest. And for some very strange reason, until now, Questcraft was the only Quest 2 game that didn't run on Quest 3. Now, I imagine that was for all sorts of esoteric technical reasons. I haven't had the time to look into it. But regardless of the cause, they have now released it for Quest 3, and that includes 120 hertz support. So you can play the Java version of Minecraft directly on your Quest 3 at 120 frames per second without the need for a PC as well. This is also a case of a PC-only title that then gets brought onto standalone by the effort of modders.
And it's like it strikes me that this pace of this is so overwhelming, David, that even the things we cover we forget about because it's going so fast. Like it's that's how these things are bubbling up. These modding systems that it's getting to this stage in the next few years where it's like it's almost going to be like, of course, that runs in VR, and that's a very dramatic shift from a few years ago, right in the 2010s, when everyone was had this narrative that nothing was in VR.
Yeah, I think the last thing I'll say on this is I'm surprised that we haven't seen Minecraft come to the Quest store, the actual Bedrock version that runs on, Android phones and iPads and consoles and every device, essentially, including PCs. One of the great things about the Bedrock version of Minecraft is you have this massive crossplay. And so we obviously did back in the day see Minecraft for Gear VR. That was a huge effort, and you can still play the version on Rift, right? If you own the Bedrock version of Minecraft on PC, you can for free play it on your Rift, and you can also obviously do that through QuestLink. But we haven't seen it come natively to Quest, despite John Carmack speaking for years since the Oculus Go era about this being something that he wanted to happen. Now, what's happened in recent years is we've seen Microsoft and Meta partner on many things, right? So Xbox for Quest, Office progressive web apps, now this new thing for Windows volumetric apps. It seems like this could finally be the time that we see Minecraft officially come to Quest, but there's no announcement or tease of that whatsoever, to be clear.
Yeah, the last tease I really remember Microsoft making was them referring to Microsoft Flight Simulator. They sort of hinted that that was their dream of the partnership that they were forging with Meta, was to one day have that coming over a Quest. We'll have to see if that ever pops up, and of course, Minecraft would be the next thing on our list of dream experiences to have across various headsets. I like number two, this next subject that we have coming up here, David, because it's like the opposite. It's the opposite of things aging beautifully with time. What is going on here?
Yeah, so Oculus Go hasn't been supported by Meta for years now, right? This is a product from 2018 that they discontinued in 2020. 4 years ago, they discontinued this. In 2022, they stopped releasing even security updates and critical bug fixes. That's 2 years ago. But if you still wanted to use this headset, this $200 when it launched, no positional tracking, no cameras on the front, just a basic laser pointer remote headset, you could, right, with the games you'd already purchased. And some people were. We've learned from this, from the outrage of a few people who currently do use their Go, that this headset is still very important to some people. VR is moving very, very rapidly. This is a technology space where 2018 might as well be decades ago, right? If you think about the industry and where it was back in 2018, this was before Quest, where this is what a standalone headset meant for most people, right? A thing that was essentially just phone VR, but in a standalone form factor. And it didn't have the track controllers, it didn't have the positional tracking, it didn't have Beat Saber. The idea of a Quest coming along and having a lot of the games that today are on Quest sounded crazy to people. People thought it was just going to be the most basic mobile games. So standalone was, this very, very different form factor. But now people are noticing that they get this error, an entitlement check field error, when they launch many of their Go apps. And these are apps that they've paid for. So these are people who back in the day, they would have paid for these apps, and now they can no longer use them. And Meta has released a long statement that essentially means they're not interested in fixing it. So I'll read that statement just so you can judge for yourself. Oculus Go was an important stepping stone in the life cycle of not only Oculus, but VR as a whole. It brought to life a new world for millions of people and introduced them to what VR was and could be. We would like to thank you for being an early adopter of this new reality and for taking this journey with us for so long. Unfortunately, all things must come to an end, and our focus has since shifted to ensure we can keep pushing on what is possible in VR. While support for the Oculus Go has ended, we hope you can find plenty of experiences, wonder, and fun with the apps that continue to thrive on Oculus Go, and hope to continue to see you in the virtual world. AKA, thanks, but we're not going to bother fixing this. It's possible that the people who built the Oculus Go's infrastructure, their store infrastructure, aren't even there anymore. They probably don't even have the code base actively there. It probably would be a big effort to go back and fix it. That's not justifying this. In any other space, the idea that a product from 2018 would stop working in this way would be, very difficult to understand. But, I'm so torn on this because at the same time, I really think that in an ideal world, this shouldn't happen. But at the same time, look at what this thing is. This is a relic of a bygone era of VR. This is not modern VR. But as some of the people who are still using this have pointed out in their outrage, this is still the lightest standalone headset Meta has ever put out, right? This is lighter than any Quest. It's the most friction-free. Quest only just got travel mode, but you put on a Go in any situation and it works because it's only freed off.
Every moment is travel mode in that headset. Yeah.
Yeah, there is no need for it. It just exactly. You're always able to put it on. And some of the Go apps did not get ported to Quest. Many did, but there are still some that haven't. And I noticed, for example, there was a commenter on our website pointing out that the original Face Your Fears is one of their favorite demo apps that they would use on Go. There's a Face Your Fears 2 on Quest, but they point out Face Your Fears 2 has far fewer experiences and that they prefer the original. So yeah, this is a complete death for Go, but it's 6 years later.
Did you call that? I was going to let this slide. I didn't want to derail us, but I think you did call that super death in our intro, which I appreciated as a comment. I thought that was a nice term, and I am appreciating people talking about heating. I remembered heating issues more with Gear VR than I remembered them with Oculus Go.
Yeah, so it was an issue with this. So with Gear VR, because you're in this phone, you're literally strapping a phone to your head and it's got 7 millimeters of space. It would overheat in minutes, right? Many times when you're using the Samsung Gear VR, within 5 or 15 minutes of gameplay, you would get your phone is too hot. So what they did with Go is they have this giant heatsink. So under this, you have this big copper heatsink, but that still wasn't enough. And one of the big innovations of Oculus Quest was to add a cooling fan. And that sounds, very quaint today, the idea that that was an innovation. But one of the biggest reasons that Quest was able to provide so much more performance over Go, it was only one chipset generation newer, as in 1 year newer. It wasn't that it was a dramatically better chipset. It's that they had a cooling fan and you could actually cool all of the components and bring out the air. And that is what enabled Quest to deliver hours of gameplay, where Go in the most strenuous of titles would get maybe 45 minutes to an hour and a half before thermal throttling itself. So also, again, this cooling fan thing I always point out is the most important spec of a standalone headset. Sometimes you hear people say things like, oh, I imagine a future where Vision Pro will be powered by your iPhone, or, why can't we just offload the compute to your phone? The reason is that phones do not have fans, and therefore
this thing didn't even use USB-C, right? Did it?
Sorry?
This thing didn't use USB-C, did it?
It was a micro USB. It was the Quest also brought USB-C. This was micro USB, the old Android charger, as many people may know it. This was, an early piece of hardware. It was $200, which was crazy for the time, right? It was the cheapest VR headset by far. But again, that brought many limitations. And this thing was not long for this earth, right? When Meta stopped selling it in 2020, not only did they stop selling it, they essentially apologized for selling it in the first place by vowing to never sell another 3DOF headset again. They said, we will never sell a headset with positional tracking again.
So Anti-Cleric's comment here is the one I really want to focus on and think about. Permit me my derailing of the conversation here, because Anti-Cleric's comment: imagine if Nintendo just turned off your NES, your original Nintendo. That is what it feels like. That is the pushback in your head mentally to this this difference of platforms, right? Like when you have a platform rollout that has security certificates, occasional entitlement checks that need to be checked in every 5 years, every 1 year, it's miserable to kind of plug in or try to turn on that device and find that this relic of the past is now gone. It's like, you know, the Pokemon faint in the game, but I was thinking about it today, and when your battery dies on that cartridge, that's when the Pokemon actually die. They don't like it. They don't. They hide it from the game. They don't actually let you see those Pokemon disappear, but they do die eventually. And the only way to answer that battery problem has been to move your save online, to move your entitlement for your game online, to like you lose power when you do that as well. And that's something we really need to talk about and think about as we move forward.
Yeah, I think the issue here is that the problem is that it's not that the device no longer works, right? You can use the built-in features of the device. You can use some apps and you can sideload anything, right? There are a bunch of apps that were built for Go for sideloading on SideQuest. You can also sideload pretty much any Android app, a traditional Android phone, as long as it doesn't deploy on Google Play services. The problem is the store. The analogy is, as you say, it's the cartridges themselves dying. It's not like Nintendo turned off your NES. It's like if the cartridges had some component in them that only lasted for 6 years and then the cartridge stopped working. So you can still use the device, but unless you buy cartridges from a third party that uses a different component that lasts longer. This is a very strained analogy at this point, but
Well,
it
no,
is the
but
store,
I like
not the headset.
but like to that analogy, and let's go back here. I'm obsessed with Tetris. Tetris is my favorite game of all time. My love for Tetris has grown, and it's really interesting to think of this game. You can go see the movie rights, like you can go see a movie about the rights of this game being smuggled out of the Soviet Union into the Game Boy. And still today, right, you can go find open source Tetris, or you can go get officially licensed Tetris. And I'm seeing in our comments, people talk about what I would consider the Tetris of the Oculus Go, and that was Smash Hit. 100% Smash Hit was the game to play on this system. There's virtual reality. There were a couple other cool games, but if you had this system today, all I would want it for is to play Smash Hit. And that's why I'm like, that's ironically, like as like a historical device, I would want this on my shelf plugged into micro USB, and I'd like to be able to put it on and have it only play that one game as a window into what VR was during this year that you're discussing, 2018. But I don't want it to do anything else. I don't want the user to get lost in any other apps. I want them to just go see, oh, this is the limits of VR gaming in 2018. That's what it was like. Am I going to have to go and find an entitlement-free version of Smash Hit to install like on this device to get it to work? And am I going to be doing the same thing with this that like some people are doing with their Nintendo 3DSs and 2DSs in order to keep those systems and games alive a decade or two in the future?
Yeah, that is an open question, isn't it? I think for me, this really comes back to what I say many, many times on this show when it comes to how fast Meta and VR in general is moving. And it's a trade-in program. Meta needs a trade-in program. If you're anyone high up at Meta watching this, you need a trade-in program. Let your customers come along with you. Let the people who buy your headsets trade them in for some value towards a new headset. Google does it with their Pixel phones. Apple does it with all their devices pretty much. It's a way to, even if it doesn't make economic sense, right? It's a way to keep customer loyalty over time and make people feel good about your ecosystem and want to invest in content. Same for the people who are stuck on a 64 gigabyte Quest 2, or people who are on a Quest 2 in general as games start to come out for Quest 3 only. Same for the people who are on the original Oculus Quest, right? It still works. It doesn't have these issues. Developers can't release new Quest 1 apps, but you can still continue to use your Quest 1 apps and the versions that Quests do support. Question here in the comment from Ivan, did Go have OLED or LCD? It was LCD. So Go introduced the lenses that are used in Quest 2. Those lenses that were in Oculus Go are still used in Quest 2 and are likely to be used in Quest 3S Quest 3 Lite, whatever it's going to be called. So that's a very long life for the lenses. The panel itself is a single 1440p LCD. So yeah, it was this is Oculus Go we're talking about, to be clear, and at the time, the resolution was very, very impressive, right? This was higher resolution than the much more expensive PC-based Rift, and with better lenses.
Yeah, people in the comments remembering Netflix. Also, Show Futuristics comment on trade-in needing to be a thing, and I love Show's comment that it shouldn't go into a landfill. It should go to schools or something, instill customer loyalty. Like that's when it's. I think of Oculus Share, this old idea, right, where people were putting things up for free, and I remember there was a functionality to like itch.io and other service where you like get pushed out to another site if you wanted to go off of Oculus Share to go purchase on something else. But like this idea that there are a good 100 apps and all these open source ideas, like as you're pointing out, this is a great device to use in bed, right? Like I bought a infrared emitter in order to have the Apple Vision Pro and have a Quest 2 work well in the dark, in a complete dark room. This thing has no problem with that, and that's something we haven't returned to in a decade.
Yeah, but at the cost that you're threed off, right? So even when you're in a bed, I still think those micro movements of your head to the side are significantly more comfortable. I am very glad that there are no more threed off headsets. I really did using Go in many ways because of the threed off, right? If this thing just had two cameras in the front and just was able to do basic 6-DoF positional tracking, it would have been a very different headset. But yeah, it would be a shame to see these things in landfills, and I think the education idea would be great. I mean, to be clear, again, it's not the headset that's dying, right? This isn't like a magically one situation where this thing is bricked. It's just the store that is breaking. So the getting apps from the store, you can still sideload stuff, SideQuest, regular Android apps. If a school wanted to build their own apps for this, they can still go and download an old SDK version and do that with a Unity version that's supported. But yeah, it's a shame to see this stop working. I just wonder how much effort would it really take for Meta to fix this? Like, is this something that there is a bunch of different back end engineering reasons that this just can't be fixed, or would this be assign a couple of engineers for a month or two?
Yeah, on that note, like I think about that open source movement, and I do think about whether we'll see tools in the future to like reformat or take over an old system with a new OS, tuned for all your homegrown content. So you can put whatever you want on these old devices, like I suggested. I noticed people mentioning Smash Hit, and you could go and find Smash Hit on mobile phones, and play the same basic game. And for those who don't know that game and what it is, you just have little metal balls with glass basically coming at you. It's very similar in the premise to Pistol Whip, and you're moving down a straight hallway with these objects coming past you as you go. And you just look at what you want, press a button, and toss a ball at a predicted arc right at these glass things coming at you. It had a really satisfying, like, glass shattering graphic animation, and the sound was great, and you could get little power-ups where you could fire out multiple balls with just one click of the button, and over time you would feel like a god out there with 5 balls flying out every time you press the button once, shattering all this glass flying at you in every direction. It's really easy to see in Smash Hit sort of the games that came like alongside it, parallel to it. Beat Saber, like I said, Pistol Whip, those games, this was a precursor to it. It's very much like, this is like a Pac-Man type experience to me, a formative arcade type experience. And our people are unfamiliar. There's people who are unfamiliar with it in our comments, as well as people who remember it as a formative thing. The very first thing they went and sideloaded onto their Quest, I saw someone say. Yeah, that was a big thing and an important piece of history we should have alive in the future. And I want to go like take over a Quest or take over a Go just for that. Didn't we find out the battery died in some of the controllers too? Isn't that another thing we have to overcome?
Well, I mean, the controllers for Go are just using a AA battery, so it would just be replacing it with a standard AA battery. But yeah, no, we have a few commenters here asking, is the bootloader unlocked? And the answer is yes. So when they did deprecate Go and they got rid of Go, they did offer a download for flashing a firmware that is unlocked, so you can do whatever you want, just like you would with a rooted Android phone at that point. We haven't really seen any communities built around this, so there haven't been people that have actually built a custom operating system for Go. It's something that you could technically do now, but it's just like, again, on like a esoteric level, it's great to think of the idea of having Go continue on, but on a practical level, it is a relic of a bygone era, right? This is a technology space that is moving incredibly rapidly. This thing launched at $200, but today for $200 you can get a whole Quest 2, right? Which is like this thing, but with lens adjustment, higher resolution, track controllers, pass through, positional tracking, hand tracking, all of these things for pretty much the same form factor and the same price. Where there's just not that incentive for people to really bother to want to do so. And it wouldn't solve the problem here again, because this is a store issue. It's not like there's anything about the OS. Maybe could you build one that interfaces with the store but bypasses the entitlement check? That'd be an interesting idea if someone could pull that off.
It's interesting. We should move on to our Apple Vision Pro here section, and should leave some space here for you to read off any interesting comments before we do that. But I wanted to bring up the flip of what we discussed, where you could take the mechanic of virtual reality and imagine putting on an Oculus Go inside of any other headset. And then once inside of that experience, you would have a locked 3DOF experience. You could have a pinch-only controller in your hand, and you could simulate the entire. You could have smash hit. You could simulate Oculus Go on modern hardware. And I do think we are in for simulated VR headsets sometime down the line that move in the other direction. But any comments you want to get into before we move on? I do want to say thank you to all of our viewers. Do try to share out the link to our stream as we move into the last subject here.
Yeah, we have more people calling out how much they enjoyed Smash Hit. It really does seem like a massive shame if that is affected. We haven't confirmed that that is one of the affected games, just to be crystal clear. Sampler19 is asking, is Smash Hit available on other VR platforms? Unfortunately not. It was only for the Samsung Gear VR and the Oculus Go. There were a few titles back then that just didn't get transferred over. The store side platform for Quest is what has continued to today, right? So Quest 1, Quest 2, Quest Pro, and Quest 3 all support the same store infrastructure, but Oculus Go had its own separate store, and that was because, again, the capabilities were just so vastly different. You don't have your dual track controllers, you don't have your positional tracking, you don't have a Guardian system, you don't have anything like that. So this had its own store, and it's that separate store that's now breaking down. And so, unfortunately, there are some things on that store that just didn't get brought over. There was a while where they did have this emulation for a few Go apps. They specifically added support for emulating Go apps on Quest, but I'm not sure if Smash Hit was one of those specific apps. As for the idea of like simulating old headsets, that was something that Palmer Luckey used to bring up a lot, the idea of having this like perfect museum of VR where as long as you were on a headset that had higher capabilities, so a wider field of view, higher resolution, better tracking, etc., you could create an interesting museum of old headsets where you put them on, and if the field of view is half, your field of view gets halved and your resolution gets cut down, and you even do things like simulate display artifacts and screen door effect and persistence. That would be a very interesting idea, and I think someone in VR chat is working on that at the moment.
Yeah. I'm seeing a lot of comments all over the board. Very interesting ideas here. Matt suggesting that the browser could still be a path to getting some WebXR content onto the headset. And I'm seeing another comment suggesting Smash Hit may still run. But I also saw Guy Godin's comment here saying that Virtual Desktop was one of the ill-affected apps.
Yeah, so Virtual Desktop does seem to be affected, but again, I don't think Smash Hit is one of the affected apps, though it's possible that we'll see more and more apps affected over time. As if there is something like this happening, it affects it. It suggests that the store infrastructure for Go is essentially crumbling. Like I said at the start of the discussion, I imagine that the people who built it and maintained it are either no longer at Meta or on completely different projects, and it's just not something that Meta wants to bother assigning engineers to, for better or for worse.
All right, well, I think it's time to move on to the Apple Vision Pro segment of this. I think we're going to have very big weeks ahead for the Meta platform, for uh, gosh, all the news that might be brewing. I've even had a couple tidbits that I'll need to get into with David after this show that we'll discuss about what other platforms might be doing in the near future. Uh, but first, I think we should talk about gaming on Apple Vision Pro. And you are David, you're one of the first people to make extremely clear that you really should not go get an Apple Vision Pro for video games. Uh, what does anything change with today's and this week's news?
Yeah, so you're right to say that in my review, which came out in February, I made clear that because of Vision Pro's lack of track controllers, because it doesn't support room scale, right? You're within like a bubble around you, and if you move your head outside that bubble, you fade back into pass through. This is not a headset for a VR gamer. And that was the case for February. But what we're starting to see is that change over time. We had known at the time of Vision Pro's launch that there were plenty of VR games being ported or in development for Vision Pro. And over the last week, we've seen 3 of those arrive. So as you can see on screen now, Demio is the first of these major VR titles to arrive on Vision Pro. And that's in full VR. So you have this option of at any time toggling between immersive VR, where you're in the basement with the virtual table in front of you and the tabletop title right there, or you can switch to a windowed mode, which is kind of like having the iPad version floating in front of you. And in windowed mode, you can use other apps because it's running in the Vision OS shared space. Whereas in fully immersive mode, it's like being in a full screen VR game. What's weird about this and what's sorely missing is that they don't have the mixed reality mode, right? So you have this full VR mode in Demio on Vision Pro. You have a windowed mode where you're playing in a window, just like on an iPad, but they don't have the mixed reality version or the mixed reality mode that is available on Quest and Pico. And that mixed reality mode on Quest and Pico lets you put the game board on your real table, right? So you're in your real room, you sit in front of the largest table in your home, your dining table or whatever, and you have this virtual tabletop board. And that's really one of the shining aspects of Demio. When it launched on Quest, we really heavily praised that as one of the best updates for this. And it's really strange to not see that on Vision Pro, right? Because Vision Pro has, that higher quality pass through. It is designed around this. They would be able to use Vision Pro's LiDAR mesh to anchor it to your table. That's all technically possible. We did ask them, are they still working on this? And they didn't give us a direct answer, but it sounded like it wasn't a no. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no. So I think at the time that they announced Demio was coming to Vision Pro, they did say mixed reality was going to be on the table, no pun intended. So I do think we probably will see that mixed reality mode come in a future software update. It's very disappointing to see it not be there at launch, though.
Yeah, so I did launch Demio, and I had some problems. It was actually fairly frustrating, right, to have it come out, and I couldn't get a game going. So I bought it on the store. It's $40, I believe, full price game, and had my partner go and check on her device whether it showed that we had family sharing on, and whether she also had it. It didn't show that she had it, so she begrudgingly pressed the buy button and then got the pop-up saying, oh, you've already purchased this, you can purchase it again, you can get it for free. So she downloads it to her machine. I have it downloaded to a laptop and have my kid at the laptop ready to play it on there. And then I'm in Vision Pro, and any combination of me creating a room, them creating a room, could not get it to work on the first day of networking here. I reached out to Resolution Games to ask about it, and they suggested it might be a local networking issue. that's when they've seen that kind of glitch in the past. I noticed on Twitter some other people mentioning issues with the implementation. The other thing, like, that could be just me, right? Like, that could be a one-off, just my local networking issue causing me problems. But that was funny to be back on square one in some instances to like what it's like to have a multiplayer experience. That is a thing to have. Like, that's always been a thing with multiplayer VR. You spend a lot of time setting up, and sometimes it doesn't work well or at all, and that's what happened to me there. The other thing, but the other small thing that really bothered me, I don't know if you saw this, David, but it gives you the option to to reskin your hands with the gloves from the in-game avatars, and it was really, really upsetting to do that. It did not feel like the hands had really strange movements that were not representative of like my fingers, or if they were, it was extremely jarring to see like another skin flexed onto my fingertips. I don't know if you tried that.
Yeah, it does seem to be a rough port for now. I imagine they probably, for whatever reason, maybe business reasons, needed to get this out. The fact that they're missing the mixed reality support suggests to me that they just had to rush this out, and there do seem to be some bugs, as you say, with local networking, with the hands feel a bit weird. Resolution Games is quite an experienced studio, though, so I imagine over the coming months they will fix that. I guess we'll think about doing a review of the whole experience at some point. A few comments here. Someone is asking, Arlen of the Arc Reactor is asking, is Demio on Apple Vision Pro cross-platform play? If not, will it ever be? Yes, it is. Demio is cross-platform on all of the platforms it's on, and it's on a lot of platforms now, right? In VR, you have it on Quest and Pico and Vision Pro and Steam VR, and PlayStation VR 2. And they're all obviously cross-compatible. You also now have it on, I think, PlayStation 5 regular and on Steam and on iPad and on Mac. So there's a bunch of different versions for flat screen where it just runs, as a traditional flat screen game, and they're all cross-play compatible. And one really interesting thing, if you're an Apple ecosystem person, is that it also supports Apple's universal purchase, which is called cross-buy by other platforms. So if you buy this for Vision Pro, you also get it for iPad and Mac. And I'm not sure if I guess the situation with you might have been something to do with family sharing, where maybe you need to have like a unique copy, but then it doesn't let you do that if you have family sharing. There are definitely
Yeah,
teething
that's
issues to be
exactly what I
sorted here.
wondered. That's exactly where I was on the frustration meter. It's like, do I really? That doesn't seem like that should happen, right? Like that's. And then I went over. It's funny. Like I go over to Steam, and they just implemented what family sharing, and you have to buy multiple licenses of the same game through Steam in order to have a game be borrowable by another player. So like Stardew Valley, I just went through this example with my family. If you want to do a co-op session in a farm and share, you can have one person check out the game at one time, but if you both want to log into the same farm at the same time, you're both going to have to own copies of the game on your own Steam account. And it's just I've I'm repeating this week after week, David. Like I'm really getting across this idea that in VR, Walkabout Mini Golf's guest passes are the closest thing we've got to having everyone in a party go together into a place and not having like four people suddenly stopped at the door waiting for a $10 purchase as well as a 10 gigabyte download. And we've got to have more games do that in the next year.
Yeah, there's certainly teething issues going on with platforms implementation of sharing and how that interacts with multiplayer. Um, so a comment here from Artful saying, "Evening all, is Apple Vision Pro coming to the UK? Do we know yet?" So we actually talked about this either last week or the week before. It may have been 2 weeks ago, where Bloomberg's Mark Gurman, who has been very accurate in the past about Vision Pro information in advance, even before the headset was revealed, he reports that Apple is currently training international retail employees to sell Vision Pro. So we expect that at some point in June, Apple Vision Pro will be available in international markets. And that brings us on to a comment from Daniel Leeper, who said, three types of people own a Vision Pro: rich, content creator, or developer. Outside of that, nobody cares what is and isn't available on Vision Pro. And the response to that, I think we can bring up another comment from Sharon B, who says, I like Apple Vision Pro content. It won't always be unaffordable. Sony's first 4K TV was 16,000. And that's very true. When we talk about Apple Vision Pro, what we really should be saying is Vision OS. As we've said many times, Vision Pro is the first product in the Vision headset line. And the Vision headset line is going to be one of Apple's major product lines, just like the iPad and the Mac. And over time, you're going to see more affordable models, but they're all going to run Vision OS. So the content that gets added now in just the first few months of Vision OS, we're only a few months into Vision OS. This is all the content that a few years down the line, when there's a Vision Air or a Vision just non-pro, just Vision, whatever they end up calling it, that's say $2,000, and then a few years down the line, $1,200. Those people who buy that will have access to all of this content that's coming onto the Vision OS App Store. So it's true to say that there's not much content today. It's absolutely true to say that at $3,500, Vision Pro is in many ways just for rich people, right? Like, you're not wrong, Daniel Leeper. To the average person, the idea of spending $3,500 on something like this is beyond ridiculous. It's completely absurd. But the product is Vision OS, and Vision OS is going to run on cheaper headsets in future. And unless you have anything more to say about Demio, I think we can move on to talk about Alchemy Labs games.
Yep, absolutely. I think it's a good transition point to get into what two of the best-selling games of all time. In fact, Alchemy is Google-owned, and they have made the interesting claim that both of their titles here, Job Simulator in 2016, Vacation Simulator, I believe, came out in 2019, both selling more than 1 million copies individually. So that's 2 million copies between these two games from one development studio, and that development studio is owned by Google. I've long thought of them as kind of the secret weapon, even though they're the opposite of secret. But there is a lot of amazing things Google can do with Alchemy if Google can just get its head out of its ass. David, why don't you talk about why this is significant here?
Yeah, so again, just in case anyone hasn't caught the news here is that Job Simulator and Vacation Simulator are now available on Vision Pro with hand tracking, because Vision Pro doesn't have track controllers. And Job Simulator back in 2016 was one of the launch titles for the HTC Vive. It actually was one of the great examples of using tracked controllers for VR native direct interaction gameplay. There were many VR titles then and many now that could work outside VR and didn't really take advantage of the spatial nature of the medium. But Job Simulator was a perfect example of something that you could put anyone, even if they weren't a big gamer or they really had never even picked up a game controller, you could put them in Job Simulator and they had this sandbox that they could play around. And ever since, Job Simulator has been released for every new type of motion controller. With Oculus Touch, they took advantage of that middle finger grip trigger and more natural form factor to make it really optimized for it. They got it out on Oculus Quest, where it's now on standalone. You don't have any wires or cables. And now they are supporting hand tracking, and it really feels like a natural fit for it. And Ian will talk soon about his hands-on impressions. Vacation Simulator already did have hand tracking since 2020, but it was experimental. And so with this release today, they've also updated Vacation Simulator's hand tracking to be improved, and it's no longer experimental. So on Quest, you can play these with controllers or just put your controllers down and use your hands. The one problem on Vision Pro is that you only get the small size room. And what do I mean by that? So Job Simulator had a very clever design technique, which is essentially responsive design, but for VR. So you just, like when you go to a website, if you resize the window or you go from a phone to a tablet to a PC, you notice that the site adapts for your screen size. Job Simulator, since its launch back in 2016, has adapted for your play space size. So on each level of Job Simulator, there are actually 3 sub-levels: small, medium, and large. and it will pick the correct one based on the size of your Guardian setup. And that's a very clever thing in Job Simulator. So if you have played Job Sim, but you've only ever played it in a small space, if you ever do have access to a larger space, go and bring your headset there and try it out, because it's very different, except not on Vision Pro. On Vision Pro, you're locked to only the small size. And that's because there is no Guardian boundary on Vision Pro. How Vision Pro handles fully immersive VR apps is that you are in this bubble that's something like 1.5 meters in radius. And if you move outside that bubble, you fade back to pass through. And if there's any physical object that you get near, you'll also fade to pass through. But it's still great to see it on this platform. And Ian can tell you a little bit about how it was to play.
Yeah, so I was playing Eternal Starlight over the weekend as well, late last week, and that's a real-time strategy game that's available on every other platform imaginable. I don't know if there's any fans of the game out down there in the comments. But it's really strange to see all of these different implementations of games that extend from different platform to different platform. We just went to Demio, which is available in completely flat modes, and then as well as a mixed reality mode on one platform, as well as full VR mode on Apple Vision Pro. Job Simulator, Vacation Simulator have only ever been full VR games, and they've only ever been controlled by hand controllers in sort of the same standard way. You mess around with objects around you. It's not like the Eternal Starlight game that I've been looking at, which is pretty much like Ender's Game, right? In that game, you have command of a fleet, and you can see the entire field of battle around you. You can see all the ships going around you, all the little missiles flying at each other, and you have to command using pinch gestures all this stuff, all this abstract stuff happening around you. It's really complex and hard to pull that off. Whereas Job Simulator, Vacation Simulator, you just reach it, grab it, toss it, you're having fun. And that's always been the case for this game and these games going back to 2016. It was amazing to do that again in Job Simulator in particular. So today, May 28th, 2024, is the day that Job Simulator gets hand tracking on both Apple Vision Pro and on Quest. That's historically significant, I think, because this is very much for the last decade, this has been the game. Job Simulator has been the game that has introduced a lot of people to VR, millions upon millions of people. If you can imagine, there's 20 million plus quests. Job Simulator belonged in most of their libraries. Even if they're only claiming 1 million, there's a lot of free copies that would have probably been given out in various fashions. But forget those. How many people did each one of those copies of Job Simulator introduce to VR? I would imagine 5 to 1, right? Like each copy probably introduced 5 additional people to VR. So there's tens of millions of people, I would think, that have their first VR experiences were Job Simulator on some platform over the last decade. And now from 2024 forward, we're going to think of this as a hand tracking game, even though for the first 8 years it was entirely only played with controllers. And that's if you're in our audience, you don't know what it's like to come at this game for the first time in 2030 and go, oh, that's what the first VR games were like. Oh, what? You had to use controllers back then? Like, it's a joke. It's a Back to the Future meme. But this is actual reality. This is what is going to happen with the VR market over the next 2 years as people get introduced to VR games that are legitimately awesome on hand tracking only.
Ross in our comments saying it's interesting that such an early VR game is still being lauded. And yeah, I mean, Job Simulator did so many things right as an introductory title. As Ian said, it really is one of those perfect demos of if someone hasn't tried VR before, or even if they're not a gamer at all, because firstly, it doesn't require any locomotion, so it's not going to make anyone sick. One of the worst things you can do to someone who's never used a VR headset before is introduce them to an experience where they're pushing around a thumbstick to shift the entire world around them. That's what VR enthusiasts who don't get sick by that kind of content love to do. It's what, big hardcore VR gamers love to do, but it's a terrible way to introduce people. Job Simulator takes advantage of the environment around you. You're physically turning and moving. And the best part, of course, is the direct hand interaction, and in a non-trivial way. It's not just like in VR games where, you're picking up a gun and then you're using that gun to fire off into the distance. It is near field direct hand interaction with two hands at once. It is deceptively simple. These levels that look like there's not much going on, you have all of these different interactions that go together, and the player over time discovers what they're able to do just by physically interacting around them. It is a sandbox, but not in the sense of a vast expanse where you can build anything you want. It's a sandbox of direct hand interaction, and that's something that we haven't seen as many VR games as I would have expected. If I were sitting back in 2016, really take advantage of that. And doing this doesn't mean it has to be a simple game, right? There are plenty of VR games that are great because they take this idea of direct hand interaction and build it in to a grander overall narrative or sandbox. For example, a Township Tale is a perfect example of that. It's an RPG where you're physically crafting items together and physically smelting and physically doing these activities, and then going out into the world and fighting enemies and doing quests like that. I'd love to see more titles really take advantage of VR, and I think that's why Job Simulator has had such staying power. Job Simulator was a game that was built for this medium, not grafted into this medium like many VR games unfortunately are.
Very, very, very useful commentary there, David. I thank you so much for that. And just to add on to it is this idea that it's defined every controller platform. Like Job Simulator was a launch title for almost every controller that's been launched over the years. It was there at the launch of the Vive Wands, the touch controllers, the index controllers, and you described direct touch interaction, but I described being incredibly uncomfortable with the immersive hands that Demio gave me in Apple Vision Pro. I didn't get that out of my time in Job Simulator. It felt like the same responsive, fluffy fingers that you've got in every other version of this game, except I can, do the same things in here that I've always done, and then grab something and toss it away. And there were a few times where it lost the tracking, but it was enough of the experience to realize, yes, they've got the minimum bar here. And I haven't mentioned it already, but I have to give this commentary or this context for people that aren't aware. Behind closed doors, Google's Alchemy has had a multiplayer VR game they've been working on for some time now, a hand tracking focused, built from the ground up based hand tracking experience. And what even if you go and buy a $3,500 Apple Vision Pro and you go try the hand tracking with Job Simulator on it, you can be like Daniel Leeper or whoever it was in the comments that says, I just want to go pick up the controllers. Like, I want to go to my Quest, pick up the controllers. It's just a better experience. That what we're moving towards is, if you can take the work that Alchemy is doing with hand tracking and build it for an operating system that is solely focused on hand tracking and lots of virtual objects around you. That's the magic of Job Simulator. Is it simulates lots of believable objects around you at once. You can unexpectedly smash together 30 things around you at any given moment in all sorts of different ways. And that's missing in mixed reality today. You talk about how Apple Vision Pro doesn't do much with mixed reality and how there's a little bit more that's happening on the Quest ecosystem. Well, that's an open play space for Job Simulator and Alchemy to play with in the future down the line. I want that hand tracking multiplayer game. I want to see what Google can do with it on their hardware that they optimize for that system. Google and Alchemy have always built their games for other systems, for other players. What happens if they control everything about the experience that gives you hand tracking?
Yeah, I want to pick up on that Daniel Leeper comment, and the comment is specifically once tried it once with hand tracking, then picked up the controllers, as I have with literally any hand tracking game, and also on your a quick comment that it's sometimes, you had like an object fall out of your hand or stay in your hand when it was supposed to come out. And what I want to really reiterate, like I said 2 weeks ago when we talked about Ultraleap, is that hand tracking technology is still not good enough today. The actual technology, the hardware and the underlying software on the headsets that exist today, it's not good enough, and it needs to get better, and it will get better. As I've seen with my time with the Ultraleap technology, it can get a lot better without any magic required, right? It just needs better sensors, better chipsets that can process the sensors at a faster rate, hardware that's designed around, illuminating your hands. Even on Vision Pro, it's not good enough. On Quest 3, it's not good enough, but it will be. And I think the problem is that some people confuse the current state of hand tracking as a technology with the concept of hand tracking as an interaction method for the long term of VR, right? So if you dislike hand tracking because you sometimes have your fingers jitter and you press the wrong button, or you sometimes have like a gesture fails to recognize, or you pick up something and it doesn't pick up, you're disliking hand tracking as the present day technology. But what I don't see from the people who make this argument is a compelling reason about hand tracking as a concept, with theoretically perfect hand tracking being a problem in a title like this. Now, there is the real disadvantage, of course, which we can't ignore, is the loss of haptics. But
Yeah.
the addition of convenience that you get from this is going to be so compelling that Alchemy, the studio behind these two games, has said that they strongly believe that 1 billion people are going to use VR with hand tracking, and maybe 100 million with controllers in the long term. And that seems very compelling to me. In the same way that today you see a huge quantity of people playing games with touchscreens, and you see a smaller core of 150 million or so people playing it with controllers and keyboards, that seems like the same pattern will be likely to play out in VR and AR, because the ability to just carry around eventually this lightweight headset that fits in your bag and pull it out without any controllers and just instantly be able to interact is something that, from a convenience perspective, is just going to be so much more compelling than picking up a game controller split in half. Because we have to remember, a huge percentage of the world has never picked up a hand controller, a game controller, and doesn't want to. And if you handed a gamepad style controller to a lot of people in the world, they would have no idea what to do with it and wouldn't want to use it.
So I appreciate all of these comments, and David covered, he didn't see Daniel Leeper's comment come in. I think he just knew that Daniel was going to get there with what he was saying. And everyone's absolutely right here, but what I want to point out, and I think it's to complement what David is saying about judging the input method as a whole based on what current technology is doing. If you imagine uh, your tracked hands as truth for all of the VR systems that are like built on top of it, what you can start what you start having to do is create haptics in lots of different ways, and having you can't even begin to imagine how much haptics you can get back if you use your hands as ground truth, right? Like, you can pick up the Xbox controller and it can vibrate in your hand in time with the game you're playing, in the way that only VR controllers can currently do because of the way everything is routed to the controller. Uh, but you take it a few steps further, where you've got wrist haptics that can give you a little bit back, or the self haptics where the fingers are touching each other, or like the little pinch maneuver, right? All this is to say, yes, a big solid vibration is going to always feel amazing for things like mini golf, or anything really physical. Even Beat Saber, slicing through boxes, feeling like you've got a lightsaber throbbing in your fingers. All that's fantastic. But what I'm saying, if you take the hand tracking as truth, you've got all of these myriad of ways to get you those haptics back in ways other than a physical controller in your hand.
Yeah, and one of those ways is just holding a general object, right? So a comment here from Daniel Leeper of saying it's more immersive to hold a controller as a bat, for example, than holding nothing. And Wabo saying even if hand tracking is perfect, the actual feel of holding a real thing is compelling for many types of games. But as Ian is pointing out, what you can do when you have good enough hand tracking, and this is something that Ultraleap, that technology I keep talking about, is very much so showing off, is that if you can do really good hand-on object tracking, like you can see in this example here for our viewers, you can turn anything into a controller, right? Because the best bat would be a real bat, right? You could actually just pick up your real baseball bat and have that used as your baseball bat. And that's better than any controller that's designed as a general purpose controller. For example, if you're going to play a tennis game, what's better than holding a VR controller? A real tennis racket. If you're going to play golf sometime in the future, we're talking obviously about 2 or 3 or 4 years down the line for real VR platforms, but this technology is being worked on. It is something that all of these companies are aiming to get to. What's better than holding a gamepad split in half for a golf club? Holding an actual golf club. And if you have hand tracking that's good enough, and it's extended into the context of hand-on object tracking, where the system is expecting you to be holding an object, eventually you can turn all of these real-world objects into perfect controllers, because they not only are emulating the object you want to hold, they literally are the object you want to hold. So the input space in VR is going to get really complicated here. And I still love VR controllers. There's still a huge space of titles that will simply not work without having those buttons and triggers and thumbsticks. And we're not saying those are going away. But what we are saying is what we're seeing happening with Job Simulator and with Demio and with these other titles is that we're seeing a new kind of VR emerging that doesn't need those controllers. And some people are going to feel threatened about that, but no one's coming to take away your controllers. And even if Meta 3 years down the line, stops including controllers in the Quest, for example, I think it's highly, highly, highly likely that they're still going to offer controllers as an add-on purchase.
It's funny, Blair, calling out my description of a lightsaber throbbing in your fingers. Yeah, it's a very visceral description. Yeah, I get that, but it's funny if you go to these conferences, you will see these custom-made, one-of-a-kind VR controllers with just extraordinary haptic effects that are never achievable in consumer form factor. But like, to think of what you could do, the amount of like resistance you could put into this object in your hand, like there are plenty of probably people in our audience, as well as just nerds across the world, who've always wanted to know what it was like to feel what it was like, what a heavy broadsword felt like. And there's going to be people who are going to come into our comments and say, you could never, ever achieve that on a VR system at home. But you can simulate some amount of weight. You can simulate some amount of resistance. And for some cases where like you want to feel like you're dueling in the 1600s, it could be that there are people who will spend thousands of dollars on a system just for that haptic effect. Right now, all we've got is systems that do that for racing, for flying, but not for all of these other things. And we could eventually get there, I think.
Yeah, so to just finish off on Vision Pro content and games, we had Sharon asking about if we'd heard about the Marvel What If experience. Yes, we have. We've reported on it. It's not out yet, but of course we plan to cover it once it does release. I think Ian's going to be on that, and it's an example of a 1 hour experience. This is more like an interactive experience that you see in something like Vader Immortal on Quest, where would you call it a game? Not really. It's more of like a somewhere between a movie and a game, a story in which you are actively participating, but it's not about like a gaming challenge. It's just about being there in the story and interacting. But in that trailer, and go to UploadVR and search for What If to see what I'm referring to, you can see that they do have a lot of hand-tracked gameplay, and this is using your real hands. One of the really cool things about Vision Pro is that it does have this masking out of your arm and hand. So if you're in a fully immersive VR game like this Marvel What If experience, you're seeing your real arm there, and not a cartoon avatar arm, and then you're able to kind of do all this interaction inside that. So yeah, unless there's anything else you want to talk about for a Vision Pro games, I think the last thing that I actually forgot to put on our topic list that I'd like to very briefly cover, because it was only a tease, was that Microsoft news about Windows volumetric apps.
Yeah, that was a very big one. Yeah, let's get into that. I do want to mention just a lot of people are talking about haptics. I saw the mention of Ashley Huffman. I've talked to Ashley Huffman, and that's an expert out there in haptic effects. And one of the things that like is really it's really before we move off this, I want to just mention that we've got all the pieces in place today for really next level amazing things when it comes to tracking, right? If you bring your feet really accurately tracked into VR and low latency, you've got you've got dancing games, you've got soccer games, you've got every other type of kicking game imaginable that was just off limits for game designers before. And unless it's a super low cost, really high fidelity system, it's not going to get adopted by developers. Well, that's what needs to happen in the very, very near future here. And haptic effects, right? If you can pair any level of haptics with that level of tracking, it's going to be a phenomenal experience for a lot of people. But yeah, let's talk about this final subject before we sign off for today.
Yeah, so again, we can't go into detail about this because Microsoft didn't. This was just an announcement, and I almost missed this on our topic list because it actually was announced like a few hours after our last week's show. But this is Windows Volumetric Apps. So Microsoft has announced for years now that they're going to bring Windows 365 to Quest, and that's their cloud Windows service. So you pay a subscription fee, and you got a cloud Windows PC, and you can access it from any device that's supported. And one of the devices they're going to add is Quest. And from the looks of it in their screenshot, they're going to let you have multiple virtual monitors coming from a cloud PC. They've also said now, newly last week, that they will also allow local PCs. So they will have this native Windows app for Quest that'll let you either rent a cloud PC or connect to your local PC and use it with multiple virtual monitors. And so that in itself is pretty cool. But what they've also said, and is much more interesting in a way, is that they're releasing a new volumetric API for Windows apps. And what that will do is when your Windows PC is being streamed to Quest, and Quest is the only headsets they've currently said will be supported, presumably Horizon OS. Obviously, once there are Horizon OS headsets, they will be there too. But that means that developers of Windows applications will be able to extend 3D elements of those applications into 3D space. So you're sitting here at your desk, you have your mouse and keyboard connected to your Quest, you've used the Windows app for Quest to connect to your PC, which is obviously sitting here, and an app that uses this volumetric API can bring this 3D model into your space and you can interact it with your hands. So a great example of this would obviously be CAD apps, computer aided development, 3D modeling. Someone could write an add-on for Blender because it's open source to use this API so that you would see your Blender model floating in front of you. And then, you make changes on the screen and you see them in real time floating beside you in 3D. So this is really, really interesting. This is an extension of Microsoft's partnership with Meta, which has seen Xbox come to Quest, Xbox Cloud Gaming, and has seen the Office progressive web apps. But this, I think, will be the biggest element of this. And in a way, this is Meta's response to not having 2D apps on Quest, right? On Vision Pro, you have Vision OS apps that can work really well as windowed apps. You have iPad apps, and then you can extend your Mac in really conveniently and easily. But, Vision OS is built to be able to support traditional productivity apps in a way that the Quest OS simply isn't. And we expect that Google's Android XR platform that Samsung is building a headset for will be able to bring in all of your Google Play Store 2D apps. So Meta, until now, has been mainly focused on web apps, which it's like having a Chromebook. There's a big reason, there are many reasons that people prefer a MacBook or a Windows laptop over a Chromebook. And Meta needs a response to that. And this Microsoft partnership seems to be that. So they're hoping that the way you do productivity on your Quest is to connect it to your Windows PC, get a really high quality experience through Microsoft's first party app, rent a cloud PC if you don't have a PC, and then extend the 3D element into space using this volumetric API.
Yeah, rent a cloud PC. It's what I've always dreamed of saying for Christmas. Mom and Dad, can you rent me a cloud PC for Christmas? Yeah, I appreciated your context on this being a little bit of an answer to what Vision OS is doing. I think it's kind of silly that the terminology and the vagueness here being just there's not a whole lot to grasp onto for actual real world use cases. It feels, this feels like another front. It feels like Meta is fighting a front against Apple in a maybe 7 fronts, 8 fronts, in different ways of trying to battle a platform war. When you talk about WebXR, OpenXR, volumetric apps with Microsoft, Meta accounts, Meta Store, right? Like there's just then you've got Horizon OS layer. You've just got layer after layer of competition in building out this platform in competition to what Apple is doing. And we have to see how this works in real world scenarios. Is there going to be a path for me to be working in a Quest and to hand you a 3D model that you could then, I don't know, bring into the studio here? Is that something that we ever are going to get to with any of this? Or is this just like this just seems stupid and ridiculous if it's not a path to doing what I just described?
Yeah, so for now, we're not seeing any aspect of networking being suggested here. It sounds like this is very much so a single user productivity experience. One of the advantages of Vision OS is that because you're not doing this on separate devices, right? This is interfacing Windows with Horizon OS in a way that is very rudimentary, right? So I'm assuming that this is just kind of piping a 3D asset across the network to be loaded then and updated in real time on the Quest. But this is happening in a specific app, right? Microsoft's Windows app. This isn't happening on a OS level in Horizon OS. Whereas in Vision OS, when you open a 3D model, and I don't think many people are aware of this, in Vision OS, you don't need an app for that. You just open it and it exists in the shared space. And when someone is on FaceTime with you, either via a 2D window or as a spatial persona in front of you, they see that 3D model and they see it not only just do they see it with the lighting from their room interacting with it. And if, someone was using that 3D model that had been generated 3 years ago, it doesn't matter. As the operating system gets updated, that's just a piece of data. And the system itself is handling all the rendering and interaction. So, if they did add a controller down the line, you can then interact with it with your controller because it's the operating system handling the functionality and the app is only providing the data. And this is a very different model to what we're seeing on the Microsoft and Meta partnership, where the software interaction here is going to be a lot clunkier because you're just piping data between a Quest app and a Windows app. The operating systems themselves are not designed around doing this. So, is it possible that Microsoft could make the Windows app for Quest, which to be clear hasn't actually released yet, this is all still being teased, multi-user down the line and incorporate Meta's codec avatars? Sure, it is. That's very much so possible, but that would have to be something Microsoft does. That's not something Meta can just magically make happen with a software update.
I think we're getting close to the end here, so let's have you look over the comments there and maybe bring up any last things we get into. Been very active over there in the comments, very interesting things to talk about. I noticed Sharon's comment earlier. I wanted to get to it, and I didn't get to it at the time, where they said that they couldn't afford an Apple Vision Pro or even any headsets in the $2,500 range, but they're still interested in learning about that. And that's the type of person we're trying to speak to when we talk about all of these different things that are potentially out of reach financially now, but are likely to move into financial reach over time. And to be clear, a lot of people buying headsets at various times or various computers, they're making investments in themselves, and sometimes those investments are bad ones, right? Like that's what we do on our show, is try to help people figure out just the right time to go and buy a device for themselves. The thing people ask about our showcase, we have a showcase coming up at the end of June. Decided to put it near the end of June to just space it out away from some of the other things that are happening. I have seen a fair number of the early entries. It's a very difficult thing to talk about the show, to plan for our showcases, because we want to give devs as much time as possible to work on their submission. We also don't want to make it super hard for them to get in, even when we want to put together a really good show that is interesting to a lot of different people. Well, what I've seen or what I know is queuing up are, wow, some incredible mixed reality experiences that are are not going to be the showcases of other places, right? You don't have a lot of places in the world right now that recognize that mixed reality gaming is a fundamentally different thing than room scale VR gaming. And we've been in contact with a great number of devs who are working on some really, really cool things for mixed reality. So we know that we've got that coming in for the show, but with when we put together these events, we have to judge and put together the final showcase based on what's actually submitted on the deadline. And that's still a few days away. That's still coming. And we're going to have to figure out what's going to be in the final showcase at the end of June from that. But from what I've seen, it's some really amazing content. And if I think I think it's still open for submissions, maybe as of like right now. But if I think it's closing almost immediately if that's not the case. But it is going to be an amazing show. And then I also want to encourage people to tune in for Don and I to discuss more games later in the week. So we talked about some games here, David, but over with Don, he really is going into VR on a daily basis and trying the full gamut of new experiences out there. I assigned Don to go become a cat, which you can go and, criticize me or commend me, but I mean, I needed to go and see what the cat game was all about. So Don went and checked out the cat game. He became a cat, and I will defend it, right? Like that is a big use of VR, is to go and become something unexpected. And that's exactly what is happening in VR right now. We've got the Capybara game that just came out. David, did you see the Titans tooth cleaning app that the person who did the cat app had built? It's the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen in VR. Did you see this one?
I haven't tried it, but I did have a look at it. Yeah, it does look
It's
rather interesting.
it's got thousands of reviews. I think it's still on App Lab, but it's Titan's teeth cleaning, and you get it. You're a little human-sized person inside the mouth of a Titan cleaning its teeth. And it's like Power Wash Simulator, but inside the mouth of a giant. And like it's getting crazier from here. This is the beginning of the craziness. Meta Horizon OS has ripped off the barriers on getting onto the Quest store, and we're starting to just begin to see the craziest, most ridiculous ideas getting huge amounts of attention, and it's happening in all over the place.
Yeah, and as you say, there's a lot of innovation around mixed reality, and that's what will be heavily featured in our showcase because developers have only just gotten those tools, right? There was pass through on Quest 2 and Pro, but now with Quest 3, you get a mesh of the real room. And as you can imagine, what developers can do with that, having a 3D mesh of your room and being able to have virtual creatures and objects and environments kind of interact with that is really, people are only starting to scratch the surface of that. And obviously on Vision Pro, you get that as well. You get that LiDAR mesh of the room. So we are really starting to see the innovation around mixed reality happen. Remember how long it takes to build games, and developers have only had these tools since October. So there's a lot going to be coming on that front, as well as, of course, a lot of more interesting, fully immersive VR content as standalone developers have more horsepower than ever with Quest 3 and Vision Pro. And obviously, even for Quest 2 games, just more experience than ever, right? People are learning over time what really works and what doesn't. And the best ideas are getting copied in the best possible meaning of that word into new formats and new ideas. So really exciting time. Lewis Baragan asks, are we approaching a VR game golden age? And we think absolutely so. We do strongly believe that.
Absolutely, yeah. And we've got some news we need to go and write up immediately. It's been a crazy weekend. I am still sort of recovering from the long weekend. It was both a holiday weekend in the UK and in the United States. And it looks like all the news embargoes are lifting as we speak. So we're going to need to jump out, go write some news, come back to us next week. We will have a nonstop barrage of news in the coming weeks. And as I said, yeah, come back later in the week, hit subscribe, turn on notifications for the channel. Don and I should be back in the studio later this week. Thank you so much. We'll see you in the future.
Thanks so much, everyone. We really appreciate your comments. And again, if you didn't get to comment on the live chat, please put your comment down below. Hopefully constructive, but we do try to read them all and take your feedback into account. Thanks so much, everyone, and we'll see you in the future.
See you later.